Tony from Building Them here, the platform that activates property managers to own their everyday operations, make residents feel at home, and take on more doors. Today I'm here again with Tony LeBlanc from Ground Floor Property Management, and we're talking about how to take on multifamily. So we're in episode 2 now, and this specific episode we're going to talk about essentially how to get new multifamily owners, how to get new multifamily owner clients. Because of course, you can build it, but you also have to market it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Really excited. Let's dive right in. So Tony, first of all, thanks for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you, and really psyched to be talking with you today.
Awesome. Same here.
All right, so let's jump right in. When we talk about getting new multifamily clients and owners, we mentioned this in the first episode a bit, but let's dig in a bit more. How are the owners that you're seeing today? How are they evolving? Have you seen them evolve over the past couple of years?
Yeah, we've been privileged to be part of a lot of different real estate investors' journeys in terms of seeing them also as just like them, or as property managers and our investors. They're also on typically an expansion journey of, they start off small, they buy, small duplexes, triplex, and they eventually make their way up into the bigger buildings because they as well see the powers of economy of scale. So I know for us personally, we've had a lot of owners that have kind of gone up that graduation chain, and it's really all about reducing risk. I think a lot of times with these guys, to where they see an opportunity to liquidate a bunch of smaller assets to be able to consolidate it into one bigger asset. It's just one roof to worry about, one foundation, and then from there they kind of keep growing it from there. So that's typically, reduce risk is obviously a big one, as I mentioned. And usually the bigger the buildings, a lot of the times we find that the clientele and the financials run a lot better and a lot smoother. So that's kind of the reasons why we see a lot of that graduation with these guys.
Just curious, are you seeing, any other people in the real estate industry become to get more into being investors? Is that coming from any particular direction, in your market?
We see some real estate, realtors, getting into investments. I think it's a natural thing for a lot of those guys to do. We see a lot of professionals. We have a lot of clients that are doctors, lawyers, in kind of those professional arenas. And we also have a lot of developers. So either they're home builders or they're developers in another city in a different part of the country. And they're looking to diversify into different markets to not have kind of all their eggs into one basket where they live. So that's been a great magnet for us.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And so we talked about this a bit in the first episode, but let's mention it and bring it up again. I'm curious, what are the qualities that these owner clients have in common? Obviously we mentioned that, accidental landlords are very different from multifamily investors. It's more of an emotional thing versus more of a numbers driven focus on ROI. Maybe we could unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's in my opinion, it's a lot funner to work in a multi-res family or business because you're working essentially with investors, and there's a lot less emotion in a lot of the transactions and to the day-to-day discussions that we have. Essentially, these people are providing you with an asset to take care of. They're expecting financial reports. They're expecting, you to prepare budgets to be able to manage the expenses and the income coming in the property. And it's all from a financial perspective. For them, it's like they bought this property, they wanted to make money over time. And a lot of these guys, which is really great, is they're also willing to reinvest. They're willing to inject capital into these things to be able to make more money in the long run. Sometimes
that's huge. That's huge for property managers, right? Because it just makes your job so much easier.
Yeah, it's music to my ears. It's like there's nothing worse than dealing with an investor that is low on money. They don't have the cash to be able to inject in these properties to make the necessary changes to either upgrade or provide some better services for the tenants.
Mm-hmm. And then here's an interesting question. How do you vet owner clients? What are some of the things that you do? Because obviously we're talking about ideal situations. The ideal investor does have a reasonable amount of cash that is available so they can, dedicate it to maintenance or amenity upgrades or, just be in a good situation so that you can, so it makes your job easier to provide residents with an awesome experience. How do you like vet those investors if it's someone who's new?
Yeah. So two main things that I always start the discussion by is one, I want to get a sense of their financial acumen. So I want to make sure that they have reserves, that they didn't just buy a building and they've put every last cent that they have into this property and they are praying to the property gods that everything just works out.
Right. Or you praying to you.
Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, I've seen too many situations where that just does not come true. I've seen a lot where it does, but it's very difficult when it doesn't and they're not prepared for it. So financial security, I need to make sure that these guys are good if something happens. For example, something happened yesterday. We had one of our properties, the heating system is run by propane, and one of the expansion tanks had a hole in it about this big. And we had to bring in a vendor to take a look, and after it all, it's going to be about an $8,000 fix to get this thing fixed.
Ooh, that hurts.
Yeah, and this is an 18-unit building. It's like $1 million building. If that would have been Joe Blow that didn't have any money, well, I now have a big problem because the heating in this building is no longer working. So they have no hot water and they have no heat. So it's like, who gets caught in the middle? It's typically us because none of those tenants know this owner. He's in Germany. So it's super important just to be financially prepared for stuff like that. It's not that we want it to happen. It's just anything can happen in this business. So
yeah, sure. And I hope you didn't get that call at like 3 a.m.
I did it. My maintenance guys did. Oh. I found out about it the next morning.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, that's the way to do it, right?
Number 2 for me is I try to weed out penny pinchers. So if you've ever heard the phrase of, I step over a nickel to pick up a penny, where they're always just nagging on $5 expenses, $10 expenses. And it's an argument, or I feel that it's going to be a challenge to get into a discussion about getting stuff fixed in the building. We want nothing to do with that.
And you can identify that from the get-go, I imagine, when you're in contract negotiations with an owner like that.
Oh, 100%. I'll purposefully show them like P&Ls of different buildings that we run, and we'll kind of go through a few different situations. And I'm gonna basically listen for the reactions on certain things, and I'm gonna see how they pick apart the expenses. I can immediately tell the guy that's going to be all over me for everything versus the guy that looks at the bottom line and says, that stuff happens. It's part of the business. And those are the people that you want to work with.
Yeah. So write this down, everybody watching. Go over the P&Ls and then look for the signs, look for red flags.
Yeah. Just kind of walk them through it and say, yeah, this is what a normal building of your size looks like. Or if you don't have anything like what they're bringing in, just give them an example, and you'll probably get a lot of great feedback in terms of their personalities, what's important to them. Some guys are really fixated on maintenance costs. Some people are really fixated on utility expenditures in terms of, if utilities are all included, are the tenants being conscious of closing the windows, and if there's spikes in expenses, all these little things that you can find out. So.
Yeah, and I would say as well, those conversations will give you some insight into the condition of the property and, the main pain points of the property, whether it's, some old systems that are causing problems that need to be upgraded in the future, and any other potential things that, might just be pain points for the property owner. So there could be an opportunity there.
Yep, for sure. And lastly, I always like working with people that I like. I like people that I can have stuff in common with. I like kind of having general discussions that's maybe not always just about buildings, and have some great rapport. So there's a personality aspect to that as well, to where, you just get a vibe when you talk to somebody. It's like, I could see myself working with this person. Or sometimes you can immediately tell, they're going to be a handful.
Painful. Yeah,
this can be painful. They got a great building, but do I really want to put up with them? And sometimes the answer is no. Almost a lot of the time, the answer is no, to be honest with you.
Right. And we mentioned this last, but it really could be first.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that important.
That's awesome. All right. So we've talked about the different audiences, the different segments. You talked about professionals. You talked about other people in real estate like brokers. We talked about a new investor, really a new group of investors that are springing up. Now, how do we really best market to those audiences? Because it's not the same as finding an owner lead, for example, from someone in and who's an accidental landlord, or the same kind of way. So how do you go about doing that in the first place and thinking about it?
Yeah, there's typically these guys that own these larger multifamilies. I'm not saying they don't, but it's a lot rarer to see them going on Google and typing in property management in your city. Typically, these guys are accessible through networking. When I started Ground Floor like 10 years ago, I don't know, it was just kind of second nature to me that my initial goal was that I wanted to be known by everybody as the apartment guy. So whenever a discussion came up, I didn't care where it was and who it was with. If the mention of apartments came up or investments in terms of real estate, I wanted my name to be somehow brought into that discussion. So that meant I had to make sure that a lot of realtors knew who I was and that apartments were my expertise. So you kind of got to put yourself out there in terms of positioning yourself as an authority and an expert in that specific vertical: property management, apartment buildings, investment properties. You got to know your numbers. We sometimes take for granted the knowledge that we have and the understanding that we have of how apartment buildings work. And we think that everybody knows it. Everybody thinks that they know how to evict tenants properly. They know how to deal with late rents. They know how to deal with all these situations, when the reality is a lot of people don't. And we tend to keep it close to our chest. So I've always been a big proponent of putting yourself out there, whether if it's social media, lunch and learns with different organizations, being involved with different entrepreneur groups like BNI or breakfast workshops and all these types of networking. But at the end of the day, I strongly believe it's all about who you know in that space. You got to know who's building, and you got to know. I made it and I still do it to this day. I still drive around the city all the time, and I make sure that I know who owns every building. Like here, I can drive down the street. I'll write down the address, and when I get home, I'll punch it into the software that I have access to from the province here, and it tells me who owns it. So if I don't know them, I can guarantee you they will know me soon. So it's just a matter of, okay, well, how many degrees away am I from them? So maybe I don't know them, but maybe I know a banker that knows them, a lawyer that knows them, an architect that knows them, a friend, a realtor. I'll find them somehow. So you got to be visible for these guys to know that you're there.
Yeah, and I think sometimes as well, like property managers are a little bit shy and they don't recognize the value that they have just in the knowledge of their local market, right? So absolutely. If you're managing like a bunch of properties locally and you really know a neighborhood, like knowing the vacancy rate and how to best like manage that rental market can go extremely far, because especially you're dealing with the people who are operating off of opinion and you have the data to back it up because you're using, software to track it, or you just have your own way of tracking it and tracking those metrics and then guiding the community. You can be a real voice.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not abnormal for, entrepreneurs, and that's what property managers are. We get stuck in the minutia of the day to day. We get stuck in the business, and it's very hard for us to kind of take our head out of that and see outside and actually see what other people see. And you'll find out quickly enough that what we know and what we do is a very valuable asset to the right people. And if you can present yourself in a way that exudes that confidence and that expertise, like the builders and the investors will find you. I get a smile every time I get an email or a phone call from somebody across the country to where they're buying a building and they've been shopping around for a while, and they tell me that everybody I talk to tells me to call you. I'm like, nah.
That's awesome.
That's what you want to hear. It's like, that's exactly what and why I do what I do.
Yeah, it's the question: who's the best in town? Like a new investor comes in, they want them, they have a new multifamily on the docket that's being built. Who's the person that's going to get it done? And if you come to mind, or you're in like the top 3 companies that are mentioned in that conversation, you're doing well. Your branding is working.
Absolutely. You got a shot.
That's awesome to hear that you approach it that way. Now, I wanted to also mention something that I think is interesting, a methodology for property managers to consider with marketing. And it's something that, we use here at Buildium, but it's called account-based marketing. And what you've been explaining is just very targeted marketing. And so what account-based marketing does is, instead of, it kind of flips the marketing funnel and casting an extremely wide net and, using like Google advertising to capture leads based on certain keywords, or doing like broad marketing and then narrowing it down. It does the opposite. So you're saying, every property owner who is, who owns a multifamily building, and you really know all the owners. That's really means that you've got your finger on the pulse, and you want to target ones that don't work with you, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So the way that you do that, and there are companies like Alice, for example, give them a little plug, that they actually help business owners do that by sending out personalized gifts to top accounts.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Even like if you're not, you can't pay for a service like that, even if you can't do that, you can still embrace that methodology and say, listen, you know what, I'm going to send out a bunch of gifts to these top 20 investor owners in my market who aren't doing business with me, to try and get them to start a conversation. And at the same time, I'm going to email them. And so it becomes like a multi-touch marketing thing where you're really going after the big fish.
Yep. That's beautiful. I think a perfect example of that is what I just started doing is, in my case, I'm sending people copies of my book to some people that I've not yet done business with. I know them. I know they know me, but now I want to bridge that gap on that relationship a little bit closer. Obviously, not everybody's written a book, but everybody can go to their local bookstore and order a book. Write a note inside saying, listen, this, find something that you think could be of value to them, or if they like sports or something financially or real estate related, and personalize a note inside, hey, thought you'd like this, should get together for coffee someday or whatever. That's definitely going to elicit a response. I can guarantee it.
Right, because you're differentiating yourself. First of all, writing a book, you're doing something that's different than most property managers. So you're right, not everybody has to write a book, but you have to think about what your brand is and how it's different from your competition.
Yep.
So that's awesome. Now, I wanted to ask you this question because I'm curious how you leverage existing relationships, and sometimes maybe some tricks that you have for getting your foot in the door with a building, even if you're not fully managing it.
Let me think that through. So with property owners or investors that I'm not yet working with?
Yeah, curious if there's just some ways that you get your foot in the door with those investor clients.
For us, it's always been through great referral partners. So realtors can be really good and really bad, but when they're really good, they can really pay off very, very well. So that's something that I always kind of hold quite close to me, but also using my existing portfolio of properties and owners and asking them, do they have any people that they know that are looking to invest in the area? Sometimes it's not about going and finding local investors. Sometimes, if you have a group of clients that are from not around here, then you can actually talk to them about it. Hey, is there any other people in your area, wherever you live, that would be interested in investing down here? So then you can partner them up with a realtor and actually facilitate a deal to bring in a building into your portfolio. I have, crazy that you mentioned that, but today, right after this video that we're shooting, I have 2 investors coming in from British Columbia that are friends of another one of my owners from Germany. And a couple of weeks ago, we have 2 12 units under contract, so they're coming to see them today. So we're going to go see those for the first time, and I'm taking them to go see an 80-unit complex and another 24-unit complex, all because I mentioned to that owner, I'm like, if you know anybody else in your area that's, hot for real estate down here, I'm like, I'd love to be introduced to them. So this was no one in my market. They're on the other side of the world, but it's paying very well.
Yeah, and you would never expect that kind of thing. And it's just good to keep an open mindset about where that money and where those clients can come from. So that's great advice. So as far as like the messages, we talked about the different kinds of clients, but I'm curious what messages you find generally work when you're trying to really show your services, show value. What are the kind of things that you talk about with potential clients?
I'll self-admit we're not the strongest on traditional marketing and advertising. I call it, if I'm lucky and I'm cursed at the same time, because I'm blessed because we've never had to do a lot of marketing. We've always just kind of been able to get clients word of mouth.
Sure, but you're still talking about things that are obviously resonating with them.
Yeah. So the biggest thing when we're having these conversations with these people, when we do get in, whether if it's on the phone or face to face, is really telling a story about your expertise and your story. Because, whether if it's how you got in the business, how property management came about, what value that you can bring to the table, honesty, trustworthiness, and transparency. These owners and these investors want to know that their property is safe with you. That's number one. They want to make sure you're not ripping them off.
Sure.
It's really that simple. Is the $50,000 a month in rent going to disappear, or do I know that it's going into the proper trust accounts and I'm going to get my cash flow every month? Those are definitely the most important things. So we try to make sure that we give great examples of how we do things, so that they can be rest assured and they have the confidence coming out of the call or the meet face to face that it's like, yeah, these guys are good guys. I can trust them. I get a good vibe. And that's really, been the cornerstone of our business. It's worked tremendously well for us. It's rare that I get into the whole details of why I created Ground Floor or why this or why that. It's important to know, but you kind of weave it into a different type of discussion with them.
Right, because it's about them first. It's about their pain points, their concerns, their goals. Absolutely. You always have to put the customer first, and that's something that we do constantly strive to do with our marketing here is, really think about their perspective, the pain points, and how you're going to be able to communicate with them from the get-go. So that's awesome advice. Now, as far as getting into like your actual pitch and like what you can't, you don't have to get too much into this. You say what you can say. Don't give away your secret recipe here. But I think to a certain extent, I'm curious, like when you put together a proposal, like what are the elements that help you really sell that? Obviously, like you mentioned, trust. All right, so what's something that you can put on a piece of paper or put in a contract that will help you, that will make someone feel that they can trust you? What technology solutions do you use, for example? Well, I know that, but what technology solutions do you use when it comes to reporting? Because I imagine that these investor clients, they want to see their reports. They're looking very closely at the numbers. So how do you kind of put that package together for them?
I'll tell you what, our proposal is embarrassingly simple. It's really a 2-pager with a quick little letter from me, and then the second page is kind of all about what's included and what it costs. Very, very to the point. Our management agreement is as such. It's a contract that's incredibly boring, legal spiel. The technology component to all this, I would say I've never gone into a pitch without mentioning we run our complete business from the cloud. So because we deal with a lot of investors they're not in the city, they're not where we live, so they can't just get out of their house and drive and go see the property. So it's huge for us to be able to position it that, so where they feel that they can access their financials at any point in time. So obviously we use Building to be able to do all that. Reporting is at their fingertips. Another big advantage that I feel that we have is we have a chartered accountant on staff. So that always makes them, I always hear the oohs and ahs when they say that, because.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. So they can constantly, okay, these guys are legit. If they're paying that type of money to have, a controller or a CA on their staff, then it's not just anybody that can do that. So that's hugely important. But really, at the end of the day, it's the discussion, it's the one-on-one that we have that really, they're able to see that. And for me, again, am I lucky or am I cursed? They can find a lot about me anywhere. They just Google me, go on Facebook, go on LinkedIn. They're going to see 10 years worth of stuff that is all, related to property management and what I do and my passion for the industry. So they can see it. And I think that goes back to the previous question. It's like, how do you market these guys? Well, you got to be in it for the long haul, to where you start positioning yourself as that thought leadership in your city where you are, and start putting out those assets and that content out there that positions you as such. Because you start today, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, you're probably, you're going to get, the door's going to be knocking, hopefully for some bigger clients. And it's going to be because of all that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you're actively controlling your reputation, which is,
you have to.
huge, because otherwise, like if you're not aware of the channels of where your business is showing up, I mean, then you can't know what people are saying, and you can't know how to control it, know how to react if there's a service problem or there's some kind of perception that maybe is an old perception that may not be true any longer. So I think that's huge. And then this last question, I'm curious, how long from the time you get like a multifamily owner lead, how long it usually takes you to close that business, if it's a long sales cycle or not? I'm just curious.
It's a good question. I've had both, to where I've literally had owners call me and say, I'm closing in 2 weeks. I need a property manager, or I just fired my property manager. Can you take it over tomorrow? But if I'm going to say on the norm, I would say anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks is probably a pretty good time. There's going to be this initial email or phone call. You're going to have a quick conversation. They're going to ask for some proposal, for some paperwork, some fees. Take a look at that. It's going to take a little bit for them to get back to you. You might have to do a bit of chasing, and then finally, hopefully, you have the opportunity to close the deal. So I would say at the norm, 2 to 4 weeks is probably a good indication, but it can happen a lot quicker. I've seen it to where, again, if you do a good job positioning yourself, when they come knocking, they're like, I already know all about you. It's like, where do I sign?
That's awesome.
That's what you want. Yeah. Then it's really, you have the leverage of that discussion. You kind of hold the spot of power there, because now they know all about you and they feel confident, but now it's your opportunity to be able to go after them and say, okay, well, let's slow down a bit. I want to make sure that you're a right fit for me. And again, that'll just increase your stock with them again, because they're seeing, oh, he's just not jumping and saying yes. He's actually diligent and who he wants to work with. So.
Oh, that's great advice. And all right, well, this pretty much brings us to the end of the interview. And I wanted to ask you, before we close it out here, what parting words do you have for property managers really looking to up their brand presence and really amp up like how they show up?
From the owners to the staff, you guys you can't be afraid of putting yourself out there. Unfortunately, we live in a world that's predominantly social media relevancy out there. So you kind of got to play with it. So you got to be able to put yourself out there and be confident in yourself and in your message to let everybody know that you are the apartment people, and showcase not only the business aspects of it, because people will think property management is boring if you start talking about it online. It's not about property management. It's about you as a person. It's about your ideas and your way of thinking. It's about your philosophies on business. It's about you as being a good person and a good character, and that's going to attract the right people to you. So once your first thing is you want to get people to know and like you, then you can easily start throwing in some stuff about what we do in property management, going for a tour at a building and stuff like that. But I think that's where it's at. I think people branding, is changing. It's not about putting a stock photo or a stock video. Don't be afraid to get your cell phone and start doing a video and talking through stuff and just posting it. Doesn't have to be perfectly edited and all that fancy stuff. People are looking for real people, and that's what they want to. That's who they want to do business with.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, thank you again, Tony, for joining us today for this episode 2. And for those of you watching, we're also going to be doing episode 3, which we'll be talking about really how to deliver on the multifamily promise. So the idea being where the rubber meets the road for execution. So we're going to get into the nitty gritty, talk about the different pieces that you'll need to put into place, and really how to make those work for you when you need to deliver amazing customer service and an amazing resident experience to, of course, your residents, and then also a great experience to your owners as well. So thanks again, Tony. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you. All right, man. Cheers.